This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast, where I help pediatric therapists become better leaders so they can make a bigger impact with their services. On this show, I'll share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help clinicians and educators feel more confident in the way that they serve their caseloads, so they can help school-age kids grow up to be successful, kind, well-adjusted people. Hey there, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 103 of the De Facto Leaders podcast. In this episode, I have special guest Dr. Theresa-Melito Conners, otherwise known as Dr. MC. Dr. MC is the founder of Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret, a suite of theater-inspired self-care and professional development services for helping professionals. The Self-Care Cabaret encompasses workshops, a podcast, and an educational curricula focused on accessible, realistic strategies that equip and empower. Dr. MC first recognized the need for such strategies as a special education administrator. She realized individuals in people-first, service-oriented roles often struggle with prioritizing self-care and work-life balance and lack of resources. Dr. MC pursued her Ph.D. in educational leadership from Lesley University, honing in on self-care and renewal for helping professionals. In addition to her doctorate and published research, she's a licensed K-12 counselor with a Master's of Education in School Counseling from Salem State University and a Bachelor's of Arts in Theater Studies from Emerson College. Her true joy is bringing her scholarship experience and zest to audiences of all kinds nationwide. I know that we've all sat in some really boring professional development, and I wanted to bring Dr. MC on because with her theater background, she really brings a unique experience to professional development in a much needed area that's not talked about a lot in many school professional development trainings. So in this conversation, we really get into how school leaders can bring self-care into the culture of the school, and really why a lot of people, whether it is therapists, school leaders, teachers, don't pay attention to self-care for themselves. They focus more on taking care of other people. And obviously, as we talk about today, that's really hard to do if you're not taking care of yourself. Interestingly enough, this goes hand in hand with some of the strategies that I teach in the School of Clinical Leadership. In the School of Clinical Leadership, I give K-12 clinicians a framework for being better leaders. Specifically, I give them the tools that they need to take on a leadership role in getting executive functioning supports into their school culture and their school curriculum so that students can get the support that they need across the day. But as you may know, when you're thinking about any specific clinical area or strategy, whether it's implemented in a classroom, whether it's implemented in the home, or whether it's implemented in a direct therapy setting, you need to make sure that you have the systems in place so that logistically you can actually deliver the services that need to happen. If that's not in place, it makes it really hard for us to do our jobs. And the thing is, when it comes to guiding teams to change their practices, people who aren't in official leadership positions, so people like the speech pathologist, the social worker, the counselor, the special ed teacher, the school psychologist, so really anybody who's involved with direct service delivery for kids can take initiative and start working towards getting their team on board. And the way that we do that is that we have to have the right systems in place so that we know how to collaborate with the right people. We know how to block out time to do those important activities that may involve planning and training others, as well as figuring out what we need to do in our direct services as well. So this can be a logistical nightmare if you don't have the right systems in place. And having the right systems in place are key to also making sure that you can do all of these things for your caseload and also taking care of yourself at the same time. So that's why I focus heavily on building the right systems in the School of Clinical Leadership so that you can get the supports for your caseload in place without burning yourself out. So to learn more about how to become a member of the School of Clinical Leadership, you're going to want to go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Again, that's drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. So now let's get to the interview with Dr. MC, where she is going to share a little bit about what she does at Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret. All right, today I am joined by Dr. Theresa-Melito Conners, the CEO and founder of Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret and special ed administrator from Boston. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Karen. I'm excited to chat.
So as we were just talking, as we're kind of getting to know each other, I was just saying how when you reached out to me about being on the show, that it was just so unique that I had to say yes. So why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, like what you've done so far in your professional career and how that led to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so thank you. I'm glad that you found it intriguing. I also think it's rather unique. So I actually have a really strong performing arts background. I've been dancing since I was about 3 years old, classically trained in ballet. When I got a little bit older, I got into musical theater. My undergraduate degree is from Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, which has a pretty well-established, renowned theater program. And I was ready to, head to Broadway, head to New York, and do all that. And I always kind of had it in the back of my mind, though, that I belonged in education, and there were kind of signs along the way, but I wasn't really willing to listen to them just yet. So I did, I did the back and forth to New York thing for a bit. I did a lot of stuff in the Boston area. I've choreographed a lot of productions. I've done professional film work for Hollywood feature films. And, it just wasn't really filling the need. So while I was kind of doing some of that, I found myself working back at the high school, actually, in the community that I grew up in. And I was essentially a secretary role, but I just loved being around the high school students. And I found a lot of what my role was doing was actually that of a guidance counselor, even though that really wasn't what I was being paid for. So I decided, maybe it's time to do the master's in school counseling. So off I went to a master's degree program in school counseling and was hired pretty quickly at a therapeutic high school here in Massachusetts. And again, I loved it. And I thought that it was really, I was working with an incredibly challenging population, kids with early onset psychosis, eating disorders, suicide ideation and gesture, really significant social emotional challenges, etc. And I did really love the work. But what I found during that time period when I was in that school was that I wasn't able to separate myself from the work. I was really on a fast track to burnout. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I thought that was something special to me, that only I was experiencing.
Yeah.
Burnout, and that it wasn't like a major issue in education, period. So, I went to my program director at the time and I said, I'm just having a hard time. Like I'm finding myself, it's impacting my sleep. I'm worrying about my students. Like, what do I do? And she said, you need to learn to not take it home with you. And I didn't know what that meant. Mm-hmm. And she didn't give me any further instruction or guidance and kind of sent me off on my own. So that actually opened up my journey to start exploring self-care. And that's when I really started to dive into the work of Dr. Deepak Chopra, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, Cheryl Richardson, and all these self-care experts that have come before me that have definitely paved the way. And I realized also that this was not something special to me. Yeah. That this was really an issue that a lot of people in education experience. So now, in my mind, it was time to earn a doctorate and let's study this at that level. So I attended a Ph.D. program here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I wanted to study right from day one. I knew I wanted to study self-care and renewal for leaders and teachers. And what would that really mean if leaders took this seriously and not only practiced it, but also promoted it for their students and for their staff, which would in turn impact the students. And what would that really mean for school culture and school climate and just overall well-being of educators, because we're in a bit of a crisis right now that was brewing, even before COVID, and COVID has certainly made it worse. But, those were kind of the questions going through my mind. So that's a little bit about me and how we got here. But then through that doctoral work and research, I decided I need to share this out. This is more than just a dissertation. Let's start a Facebook page. We'll call it Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret. And I love the name because it plays off of my theater love and my experience, but also self-care. So what started out as a little Facebook page and maybe a volunteer conference presentation here and there has now is growing pretty rapidly. I have a podcast. I regularly present to schools, businesses, and organizations on topics related to self-care. And I love helping people take better care of themselves.
Wow. Yeah. That's what's really unique about your situation is that I know people who they'll get into self-care and they'll be a coach, which I think there are probably some really good coach trainings out there, but you have a doctorate, like you're really an expert. And so that's really, that's really unique because, and again, like I said, there's a lot of different ways that you can get credentials and training. If you want to expand what you already have, expand on your counseling license and other things like that. But yeah, that is really interesting. So what did you actually study in your dissertation research? Like what was the study about?
Yeah. So the degree is actually a Ph.D. in educational leadership, but my main area of scholarship was self-care and renewal. So the dissertation title has like one of those like super long, very academic titles. Yeah. I'll tell you what it is, but it's the perceptions of private special education school leaders regarding their role in promoting self-care and renewal practices for themselves and their teachers. So at the time when I was doing the study, I was actually working for a trade association here in Massachusetts that supports all the private special education schools. And so that was, those were going to be my study participants, and they were willing and eager to be a part of it and share their information. So I surveyed them, I interviewed several of them to kind of come up with the data for the dissertation study.
Yeah. So, I mean, what did you find throughout that process that surprised you? Other than the fact that you're not the only person struggling with this.
I knew that before, but yeah, for sure. The findings were really interesting. I think a couple that stood out to me, I think there were three that really stand out to me the most. The first was that school leaders felt that self-care and renewal practices were more important for their teachers than for themselves. Like on the responses, it was all like about, this is super important. Yep. They're very important. High, fives or whatever. And then it was like, oh yeah, but no, not for me. Less important for me. So that was interesting to me. I don't know and that's certainly not the message that I like to give to people. Like, you have to take care of yourself as a leader, and you also promote it for others. It's not something other people need and you don't. That's not it. So I thought that was interesting. Another one was that people really don't tend to start paying attention to their self-care until later in life, when either they just start feeling the impacts of aging, or they're faced with a health consequence or a health scare of some sort. Yeah. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and they're like, I better start taking care of myself. So part of my work, I like to get younger generations to really pay attention to this stuff, because it's not something that should wait until you're in a crisis situation to start paying attention to.
Yeah. It's, just from a motivation standpoint, it's easy to just put it off when you're young and you can just power through. And there's so many different examples of that. That's really interesting that the administrators thought it was important for the teachers and not, or the staff and not them. I wonder if that is common in other situations where there's a person who is responsible for the care of others. So for example, the leadership thinks that it's important for their staff, but not for them. Mm-hmm. The staff think it's important for their students, but not for them.
Absolutely.
Think it's important for their kids, but not for them. Like, and all of these other things, you always think about the person you're taking care of and not thinking about, what about me? How am I supposed to take care of somebody else if I'm
Right.
not in a good place?
Right, because self-care, society makes us feel that it's selfish. That's the messaging,
Yeah.
that you can't, it's selfish to take your paid time off. It's selfish to put your needs first. Who does that? Like, but it's a really twisted view of what it is. And people don't understand that self-care is other care. It allows you to be able to show up better for your students, for your staff, for your children, for everyone.
Yeah. I wonder if it's just, do you think it's just that people don't understand what it actually is? Like it's being presented in a way like you're overindulging, you're drinking all this wine and taking a bubble bath and all this stuff, and like it's like people are kind of overdoing it and making it seem like it's something that it's not. Do you think that that happens?
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what is self-care. And there's a lot of marketing around self-care. It's big business now. There's
Right.
corporations and all kinds of things preying on your vulnerability to try and sell you things and make like, but that's not it. And then you have those, kind of stereotypical depictions of self-care, that it's really expensive and luxurious and it has to be these all day spa events or mani-pedis, and like that's not really what we're talking about when we get to the true meaning of self-care.
It's interesting that so those examples, and I mean, obviously anybody can do whatever they want. And so I don't want to gender stereotype here, but a lot of those things traditionally have been thought of more as female things, to put in air quotes. And I just wonder if that actually, again, like makes it less acceptable to, if you are more masculine, to, like if it's like, oh, it's okay for these people, but not these people over here. And people in leadership positions tend to be the more, ambitious driver, where it's almost like not congruent with the qualities that you think you're supposed to have,
Yeah. I think that definitely plays a factor. And even now, like if I look at, the demographics of those that follow me or book me for presentations, like it's predominantly women.
Yeah.
There are definitely, I definitely have male followers. I definitely think self-care is important for males. Also, it's important for everyone, but it does tend to be a more woman heavy, thing that's more appealing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes when you define what it is, that maybe it makes it more, I don't want to say appealing, but yeah, maybe appealing. So, I mean, how would you actually define self-care? How should it look day to day?
So I think it's those stereotypical things that appear to be more feminine, maybe.
Right.
Whereas when we get so the real definition, in my opinion, is not mani-pedis and bubble baths. It's really foundational practices that you do every day so you show up as the best you possible. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be time consuming. As a matter of fact, they can be quick and free, which I mean, doesn't get better than that. But it's proactive. Like you want to be doing it in a way where you're not in crisis mode and then you're like, oh my gosh, now I got to take a yoga class. Like that's not it. You don't want to get to that point. The hope is that you engage in these practices, you build up your resilience, you manage your stress in healthy, productive ways so that when those situations arise, you're able to better react to them. Because like stress isn't going to go away. We're still going to still going to have stress. But the way you react can really change by how you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah. I think that sometimes those stereotypical things can almost be counterproductive. Again, going back to the wine thing, that seems to be a trendy thing that's promoted in self-care, where it's actually, I mean, alcohol is literally poison. It's the opposite of self-care. Yep. Not that I'm, shaming people for drinking wine. Sometimes I like to drink wine, but if you really think about it, it's more about being proactive and thinking about what your future self wants, not what what you want in the moment. And so I think that some of those things are the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an unhealthy, soothing strategy.
Yes. Yeah.
For sure.
So what is the process? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I think I was going to start to jump into what you're going to ask.
Yeah. So what's the framework that you use for helping people, or that you present to people when you're coaching or presenting people?
Yeah, so I like to look at things from the 10 domains of self-care, which actually comes from Dr. Catherine Cook Cotton's research. And the 10 domains of self-care is really, I think, a pretty comprehensive framework. And I can tell you what the domains are, but it helps people kind of conceptualize that, yeah, we're not talking about mani-pedis here. And so when we look at the 10 domains, we look at nutrition and hydration. So how you feed your body, how you hydrate, and ways to do that and honor your hunger and your fullness. Then we look at exercise. So you have to move your body. And what does that look like? And promoting, though, that it can and should be joyful. Movement should be joyful. It shouldn't be punishment or extreme. I also, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm in recovery for disordered eating and exercise bulimia. So when I get into the nutrition, hydration, and exercise domains, I really lean heavily on a health at every size perspective and into the research on intuitive eating. Mm-hmm. So that kind of plays into those as well. Then we get into looking at soothing strategies. How do you soothe yourself? Is it wine, or do you have maybe some deep breathing practices you engage in? Mm-hmm. Then we look at mindfulness and self-awareness. Then we look at rest and relationships, the physical medical domain, the environmental domain, self-compassion, and the last one is spiritual. And the spiritual domain is really, teachers do great in that domain because we see how important the work is that we do. And we know why we show up every day for our students. So that domain tends to be really strong among educators and folks working with kids.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I like how it's kind of laid out into specific areas. I think that having that framework can be really helpful in figuring out what to actually do. So it's not just this generic thing and you're just randomly throwing things out there. It's okay, how are we going to think about all areas comprehensively?
Right. And the thing is too, and I always say this in my workshops, I do not try to do all 10 domains tomorrow. You can't go from 0 to 60. But and this is a piece too that I think sometimes people don't understand. Even if you just take one domain, or even just one new coping mechanism, maybe it's deep breathing, or you work on your sleep, or you work on your hydration, any little bit that you do will have a really big impact. So it doesn't have to be time consuming. It doesn't have to be, it can be free. And most of this is, deep breathing is one of the most wildly underutilized coping mechanisms, and it's free. And you can do it literally anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. When you start with one thing, sometimes it can lead to another thing. And there's kind of this snowball and vice versa. Whereas it's okay, you can go. I was listening to this podcast and this guy was talking about how when he goes to conferences, some people are like, let's go to happy hour. And he's like, I don't go because I know that I'm going to go there and I'm going to have a drink. And then I'm going to want another drink. And then I'm going to, drink too much and stay up too late. And then I'm not going to sleep. And then I'm going to sleep in the next day. And then I'm going to be behind on my work and it's going to be 3:00 and I haven't started on anything. And I'm going to think, why do I even get started on my work? Because it's already 3:00 and then my whole weekend is derailed because of having one drink. And just knowing that it's okay, if I am going to pay attention to my nutrition and hydration domain and say, I'm not going to have a drink, or I'm going to go to my room early and get in bed early, it just impacts your whole day and vice versa. If you're going to say something like, I'm going to get in bed by 9:00 tonight, and then you get up early and then you have all this stuff done. It's the one decision that leads to the other decisions, but you're only really committing to the one thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, but it's really, it's powerful stuff. And I think too, once people start to feel a little bit better and feel a little success in one domain, then it's all right. What would happen if I went to bed at 8:30? Or what if we really push the envelope and really work on the sleep? I find that people when I give, like, there's assessments that we do sometimes in the workshops and whatnot, and sometimes folks are just really hard on themselves because they're horrified that they score like low
Mm,
across the board.
yeah,
It's
that's
like, that's
interesting.
okay. Like, that's just showing you that you have room to grow. And it's not to make anybody feel bad, but to remember that, one new habit, start small, wherever it at. Maybe you're going to walk for 5 minutes a day, or get outside for 5 minutes, or have a 5 minute dance party, get some joyful movement in, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be this epic thing, but you'll feel better pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. Do you have to get people in with micro commitments like that, where it's okay, just do this one thing and then regroup? I mean, do people sometimes get overwhelmed with this and think that they can't do it?
Absolutely. And I usually will tell people to take it like a week at a time. Like, let's say I'm doing maybe a 5 week series. And so at
Mm-hmm.
the end of week one, I'll be like, okay, because I love myself and others, I will practice self-care this week by, what are we going to do? Tell me. And then make people come up with kind of their plan. But I also make it reasonable. Like, don't tell me you're going to exercise every single day. If you haven't been exercising, that's not realistic that you're just going to
Yeah,
turn it around and sustain it. But maybe you can commit to, 10 minutes, one day, something small and tangible, and then kind of build it from there.
yeah. Yeah, I think the habits are, I know that for myself, whenever I say that I'm going to be doing something and I go too gung ho, then I'll do it for a week and then I'll stop. And then it wasn't very productive. And then I think sometimes people get into this thinking of thinking that things don't work when they really do, because they went too, they got too ambitious with it, or they did too much and it wasn't sustainable. And then they quit before it really had time to work for them.
Right.
And then you
Yeah.
get into that whole thing.
And then I think people feel too, like, if it's not, epic and long and time consuming and expensive, like, is it going to work? How can it work? Like, how can something so simple
Yeah.
work? And yeah, so, like, one of my favorite examples to share, and this happened on my podcast, someone was sharing that every morning before they jump out of bed and go on with their day, they just take 1 minute, a 1 minute meditation where they just breathe, kind of lie there in bed, and just give themselves that 60 seconds before diving into their day. And that just really centers their day, it grounds them, it gets them in their body, and they can go about their day successfully. And that's so simple. But yet, I feel like when I tell people that, sometimes they're like, raise their eyebrow. Like, how could
Yeah.
that work? It's like, just
Yeah.
try it. Trust me.
I definitely have had that thought before when people have
Yeah,
made
no, it's
suggestions like
easy.
that. Yeah, it just
Easy
it's like you think it needs to be hard for it
Right.
to work. And
No,
some
we
things,
make things hard. It doesn't have to be hard.
yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I bet people who are in leadership roles who do identify as ambitious probably have that tendency to make things hard because they think like you know, I'm tough, or I'm resilient and I'm going to do this thing. And, I mean, obviously resilience is really important, but I think you can be gentler with yourself about it.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take a quick break here. So, I know that you're probably starting to notice that one of the reasons that self care doesn't happen in helping professions is because people don't think they have enough time. And the truth is that typically it's not about having enough time, it's about having the right systems. So that's why in the School of Clinical Leadership, I show you how to put the right systems in place so that you can do everything that you need for your caseload without burning out. Specifically, the program is focused on getting executive functioning supports worked in to your student's day. And if you are involved in K-12 at all, you know that this really needs to be kind of a tier 1 initiative at the building or the district level. So that can be no small task, which means it's really important for you to have the right processes in place so you can collaborate with the people that you need, get the support that you need so that you can work together as a team to make sure that kids get what they need across their day. And I help you actually do this by implementing what I refer to as the master plan. And the great thing about the master plan is that you can think about everything that you need to do throughout the course of your year to make sure that you get your initiatives that you want pushed forward. So if you want to change something that's going on in your building or in your community, this is the key to making it happen. And the great part about it is that you can work your self-care routine into this master plan. It's designed to help you plan your whole life, not just your work. And this is exactly what I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership. So to learn more about how to become a member, you're going to want to go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. So now let's get back to the conversation with Dr. MC.
One of the things too, when we talk about like leaders and teachers and staff and whatnot, one of the things that emerged from the dissertation that wasn't necessarily a finding, but I wanted to share was that there was some awkwardness around leaders feeling like they didn't know how to promote it for their staff. They didn't know how to. Like I had one study participant was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Ask them if they like slept good? I was like,
yeah.
Well, you could start there, maybe be less awkward about it, but you could maybe do a PD around the importance of rest or, something. But yeah, start having these conversations with people, share the things you're doing, try to give them, time when you can and empathy when you can, and make it part of the culture that it celebrates self-care and educator well-being.
Yeah. What are some of the things that, what are the top complaints that you get around this when you're training people or just surrounding self-care that they're struggling with? What do they think their problem is?
They don't have time. It's time.
Yeah. I get that one too.
Yeah. And I think that that's just an easy cop out.
Yeah.
There's time if you make it a priority.
Yeah.
You can find time. We're talking about things that take a minute or two that will actually make you better on the other side. So isn't there a quote? I'm blanking on who said it, but it's something like, it's about meditation. It's like, if you feel like you don't have, 10 minutes to meditate, then you should meditate for 45, something along those lines. It's like, that means you need actually more of it. So, making sure that people understand that these are quick, free things that you can access and embed them into your day. So it doesn't become like now I do my self-care, that it just becomes part of who you are and how you show up. You have strong boundaries and you have coping strategies and you access them when you can and when you need to all the time, so that you're managing yourself, so that you don't get into crisis mode.
Yeah, someone told me one time with the meditation thing that you can do it while you're walking. You can do a walking meditation while you're walking back to your office, or you can just do it while you're sitting there instead of scrolling your email that you already looked at 50 times or whatever.
Yeah. You do it lying down in bed.
Yeah.
Right before you wake up in the morning, before you go to bed, sitting in a chair. Like, that's a lot of things too. Like we have these stereotypes of like what perfection looks like. And, when we think about meditation, well, you probably picture someone on the floor in the cross-legged pose, for hours on end or whatever. Well, that's not how it has to be. You can absolutely do a walking meditation. Just pay attention to your surroundings and be in the present moment.
So when people think that they don't have time to do self-care or meditation or whatever their strategies are, as you're working with your staff, because you're a school administrator now still, I know, so they think their problem is no time, but what do you see as their actual problem, whether it be the staff or the leaders themselves?
That's a great question. I think it goes back to culture of the school.
Yeah.
Education in general is very fast paced. There's a lot of expectations on all school staff. They are strapped for time and resources and energy, and they're always being asked to do more and more. And so it's really hard to push back on that and to protect your own boundaries. So I think it comes from leadership having to, cultivate a space that makes it okay for staff to take a break and for them to, to see that. Like my staff sees me. Like, for example, last week we had a really difficult meeting and I needed to step outside for a minute and just take some deep breaths. I needed some fresh air. I just had to take a minute. My staff saw me do that. One of my staff actually came with me and stood outside with me. She was running to the mailbox or doing something else. And she kind of just stood there with me. And I was like, I just need a minute. So being able to be vulnerable and model that for staff, I think is important. And that was really kind of my whole hope with the dissertation study, that I would find that when you do those types of things and when you model it and promote it and it becomes part of the culture, that it will be easier for everyone. Then it just becomes part of what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think the habits and the systems, I mean, a lot of people who are very ambitious are all about, building the good habits. So it could easily just be worked into that.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of it comes down to boundaries. There's a lot of boundary crossing in education, for sure. And you have to really be clear with your boundaries and strong. And I actually had somebody recently, a fellow administrator, we were talking and someone else was going to reach out to me and they were like, oh, just tell Teresa I'll talk to her on Sunday. And the other administrator was like, I'm not telling her that. She works really hard on her boundaries and I'm not telling her that. And she was telling, and I was just so flattered. But a second I was like, oh, she could have reached out on Sunday. And then I was like, no, she can't, because Sunday, that's my time. I'm not working on Sunday. I'm not, you know what I mean? So, but to actually, that's taken a lot of work to get people to recognize and honor that that's a boundary and that's my boundary and I'm not breaking it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I think you can kind of almost train other people what they can expect from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or responding to emails too is another one. I know that it's so random where it's somebody sends you an email and then 5 minutes later they're like in your office, did you get my email? It's like, yes. But
it's 3 seconds ago, relax.
I know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I actually had a teacher, one of my teachers, who's on my staff, told me the other day, I just noticed that she does a lot of schedule send in her Gmail, which I didn't say anything, but she felt compelled to tell me why. And she said she likes the schedule send emails to go after school, so then parents don't think she's available during the school day, because she's really not. She's busy. She's seeing kids. She's a special ed teacher, all this stuff. But I just thought that was really a nice little boundary that she set for herself. So to not give the impression to parents that they can bother her all day long, because they will. You teach people how to treat you, right? Yeah. So if they think you're available all the time, then that's what they're going to expect. So trying hard not to respond to emails on off hours, not check it all hours of the day, night and weekend. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, when I think about it from my end, when I think about it where it's like, okay, if I'm going to reach out to somebody and I know that they take, they don't respond on weekends, or I know they don't respond between this and this hour or whatever it is, and I just know what to expect, even if I have to wait longer, but it's consistent and I know, then I'm fine with it. It's like, oh, okay. It's like, oh, I emailed them on Friday night. I don't expect a response until Monday morning, and I'm fine with that. A lot of times it's more of a people pleasing thing. Like, what's going to happen if I don't respond right away? And really they'll be fine with it. They just want to know. It's where it's inconsistent, where it gets a little bit confusing, because if they're used to getting your emails, 5 minutes later, and then all of a sudden you wait, a couple hours, then what's going on? But if they're used to it, then it's fine. And everybody knows what's going on. It's very calming for all parties involved. So with the whole scheduling thing and just thinking about how to communicate just as a team, I'm curious how you model for your staff when, you've got to collaborate as a team, when you've got to set up, IEP meetings for kids who have, need to get this whole team of people together and they're all busy and you've got consultants coming from all, I don't know if it's like that in your district, but how do you handle having boundaries, but also being flexible when you have those unique situations that do, require some flexibility? How do you balance that?
Yeah. Sure. I think for me anyway, it's a constant negotiation of what's the priority.
Yeah.
So it's always, everything has to get done at some point. Mm-hmm. But not everything is an emergency. Not everything is a top 3 priority. So I'm very organized with, writing things down and notes, and, we have a lot of timelines, as you know, in special education that you're bound to. You have to stay within that, of course, but making sure that you are just prioritizing your tasks as best you can, and really, which fires you put out first.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are the ones that are the priority, and some things then end up waiting, but also understanding that you cannot do everything every single day, and some things will wait and they'll still be there tomorrow or the next day, and that's okay, and being okay with that.
Yeah. I always appreciate when I was in the schools, I always appreciated administrators that would have that culture of backing me up with those boundaries, with things like meetings, with things like, how parents treat staff. I had a principal so the scenario was, this teacher was actually being bullied by a parent. I can't remember what the scenario was, but something was going on in the classroom. The teacher was handling it totally appropriately. And the parent was kind of like, I don't know, micromanaging a little bit. And so they had this meeting with the principal, and it was the principal, the teacher, and the parent. And the parent's like bossing him around. And she just looked at this parent, was like, you do not talk to my staff like that.
Right.
And the parent was like, oh, okay. And she's like, by the end of the meeting, they were happy. They shook my hand and we were all good. It's like, some people almost need you to be like, this is what we do around here.
No, absolutely. And I think, they need to know that leadership has their back.
Yeah. I had a great principal that I worked with. Well, I mean, all the principals that I worked with were really good about that, but I always appreciated that. And especially with IEP meetings, I knew some teachers who just had a really hard time setting boundaries with parents, because the parent it was like they were just bending over backwards with the meeting time. And there's this whole team of people that needs to get together, instead of being like, this is the day, I'll tell you in advance, this is the day that we have to do it. These are the hours that we can do it based on our contract. We can't do it at 6:00 at night and get 20 people together, that's not how it works. It's just so interesting. And I used to say, if you go to the doctor, you don't expect the doctor to meet with you at 7:00 at night. Right. That's what you think about doctors. But people sometimes don't think about that with teachers. It's like, you expect the teacher to meet with you after school. And that's just because part of that is a cultural society thing, but you can set that culture in your building, that this is what we do in this district, and people do listen when they know what to expect.
Absolutely. Yep. And I've definitely gotten those requests too. It's like, why can't we meet at that time? Well, I'm sorry, no one's available. No one's working. School's closed.
Right. I mean, you have the contract hours. And I mean, again, I found that when you communicate in advance and you tell people what's going on, that usually it's okay. I mean, yes, there's extreme situations where people are, have issues with accepting other people's boundaries, but sure, in most cases, people can be reasonable. So I want to go back to the cabaret concept. So how does that actually work? Because that was one of the things that I was like, ooh, this is really interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, the title kind of came out of just a fun way of incorporating my love of theater, my theater experience, and my expertise in self-care. But so everything I do, I guess, how I show up in the world is very theater-like. I mean, I know folks can't see me right now, but there's a lot of glitter around me. There's some sparkle and whatnot. It kind of feels like I'm on stage. And when I present, I consider it like a performance. And so that kind of everything is kind of theater inspired and kind of plays into the unique experiences I think that I bring to the table, that I've mentioned some of it, like my struggles with overcoming being in recovery for an eating disorder, overcoming some challenging childhood traumatic experiences, and different things that I kind of bring together all becomes kind of the cabaret, the show, as it were. And it's just me. It's just how I am.
So is it an actual cabaret? Like, is it
No.
like a performance, or is it just kind of, that's just sort of the vibe?
That's just sort of the vibe. And I think it's, when I present, I'm very engaging. I get people up and moving. We do a lot of activities. I make it a lot of fun. I crack jokes. I'm very vulnerable and open. So people tend to be very engaged and entertained. Yeah. It's not your typical boring professional development that we've all had to sit through at one time or another. It's very different, and that's me and what I bring to the table. So it kind of has that theater vibe.
So there's not the, the dry PowerPoint slides with lots of text.
Yeah, well, I do have PowerPoint slides that are very fun, but definitely not boring with no, absolutely not. But no, I don't have, like the stool and the bowler hat and the maybe someday we'll actually do a cabaret show. I'm not opposed to it at all, but that's and then kind of it's just a little more playful too in how my sessions are named. They're kind of named for different theater things, and like we talk about work-life balance, it's called Don't Be Upstaged, or we look at Lights, Camera, You, the power of a growth mindset. So I play into all of that kind of theater language in a really, I think, really fun, engaging way for folks. And it's gotten pretty good feedback. So I think it resonates with folks too.
Yeah, I just, I'm thinking of professional development where it's like everybody wants to, be back in their classrooms getting all their paperwork done, or, again, you don't think of cabaret and professional development going together, but
I know for sure. Oh no, and I've definitely had people. Like I did a session, an in-person 3-hour workshop back a few months ago at a community here in Massachusetts, and it was really funny. It was a huge group of people, probably over 100 teachers, and they definitely came in with the vibe of another professional development. I have to listen to this woman talk about self-care for 3 hours. I could hear the murmurings, and I'm just all right, get ready. And by the end, and people even were told they could leave because some people were paraprofessionals or whatever. They had different schedules, had to go to other things. Nobody left. They were told they could leave. Nobody, and I gave them breaks. I gave them opportunities. I told them I wouldn't be offended if they had to go. Everybody stayed, and at the end, they were like, "That was so much fun. I'm so glad I stayed. I was dreading this."
It's so funny because I know that even I remember one of my administrators was like, "I hate when they make you participate. I just want to sit."
For sure. I don't make anybody do anything too crazy.
They're not up on the stage dancing unless they want to.
Not yet. We might do that at some point. No. No, but we will do stretching, maybe some stretching things, some gentle movements and breathing exercises. I may teach some theater games, kind of mindfulness stuff, getting you into your body, that kind of stuff. But no, nothing. I don't make everybody get up and do the Macarena. I might do the Macarena.
Well, I bet that if you have a background in the performing arts, you probably have learned how to work the crowd and feel people out, right? Where you can tell if people are into it or if people are get away from me, do not make me come up there.
Absolutely. You can definitely feel the energy in the room if they're vibing with you or not. You can even feel it on Zoom sometimes. I do a lot of virtual presentations. And sometimes I'm just ooh, what is with this group? It's just not, it is not.
You can tell on Zoom too. I mean, I'm sure that you get more when you're in person, but you can kind of feel people out even if it's virtual.
I think so.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know that sometimes, as we've gone to a lot more Zoom presentations, it's great that, you can do things without having to fly out places, but but there is that in-person element that just the energy is a little bit different.
Absolutely. And it was really funny too. And going back to, how this kind of all came to be, when I started to do some self-care presentations, I was really enjoying it, but it hadn't quite hit me at how much giving a presentation is like a performance until I had done a workshop at a big conference at Salem State University. And I called my mom afterwards and I was like, I actually got like emotional. I was like, this was a really roundabout way to like keep performing as a part of my life. Like this is, and then what kind of emerged also as I was working my way through the doctorate, Dr. Melito Conners is fun, but Dr. MC, well, that's very cabaret. Like that just works. And I didn't plan that. I mean, I didn't have this planned when I met somebody that had a C for a last name. So this wasn't a long con to have Dr. MC as a name, but I'm like, well, that works really well.
It totally does. It just has a nice ring to it too. Yeah, so this reminds me of, it's a TEDx talk. And this isn't, a clinical term, but she uses the term multi-potentialite, where she's talking about how you don't have to just be one thing. And you can be, I think the example she gives, like you can be a psychologist and a violin player, and like just the idea of having, multiple passions, and you can have more than one thing. And so, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and enjoy the journey, enjoy the ride. Like life's short, so let it take you where it can. And things have kind of evolved, and all of my experiences and my training helped me, today and support me today, and have led me to where I am now. And I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. Well, I love it. It's really fun and unique.
Well, thank you.
Do you have before we wrap up, any parting words or tips for people to help make self-care a consistent part of their routine and a non-negotiable?
Yes, I do. I think it's important for people to remember, if they take anything away from this conversation, is that it can be small, it can be free, it can be quick, but these things will help you immensely. And it's really important to put your needs first. I know it might feel awkward. It might feel a little selfish or a little different, but that's because society makes us feel these things. But self-care is other care. Your needs come first. It'll actually make you better able to meet the needs of others as a result.
Great. I love it. So where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, hear about your podcast?
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So I have a website, drmcselfcare.com. That's drmcselfcare.com. And my social media handles, I'm on all the platforms, maybe even TikTok soon. I don't know. But right now, very active on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. MC Self-Care. I'm also on LinkedIn. And when you go to my website, you also have links to the podcast, which has the same business name, Dr. MC's Self-Care Cabaret. It's on all major platforms if folks want to check that out. And there's also a way to kind of look at the presentations that I offer and reach out if you'd like to book a gig with me, or just reach out and say hello. I'd love to hear from people and connect with folks on social media or via email or whatever way suits them.
Great. Love it. Well, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Dr. Karen. This was fun.
Before I wrap up, I wanted to remind you to check the show notes for all of the links where you can connect with Dr. MC, listen to her podcast, as well as learn more about the Self-Care Cabaret. Also, if you want to learn more about the School of Clinical Leadership so that you can learn how to put the systems that you need in place so that you can support your caseload and also work your self-care into your day-to-day routine at the same time, you're going to want to go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership to learn more about how you can become a member. Remember, it helps me out so much if you rate, review, and follow my podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, if you have a suggestion for a guest on the show, or if you would like to be a guest on the show, please email me at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. I'm always looking for amazing guests who are using their clinical skills to make a difference, who are showing leadership in supporting K-12 kids, and who are agents of change in their community, their facility, and in their field. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.